Hi, I'm Tina, MSearch's founder and president. Welcome to this episode of Leadership Delivered, where we discuss and unpack the big ideas behind what's happening in business and recruitment today.
Hi guys, Samir here. Welcome to Leadership Delivered. Today we're going to be talking about the evolution of the remote working landscape. Today I have Fernando Vega, who is our head of search. Fernando, welcome to the podcast. Would love to first start off by giving a bit of an intro to yourself.
Going on, Samir. Obviously, my name is Fernando Vega. I am the head of executive search at MSearch. I've now been with the company going on 6 years. My career has kind of taken me in interesting places. I actually began as a financial statement auditor, so I am still technically a Florida CPA. But did that for a little bit. Found that I had more of a passion for client service. Got into financial recruitment, and then eventually transitioned that into what I do today, right, which is executive search. So, very, very interesting work. Definitely doing things that are very different from my early days in audit. So it's been a wild ride.
I can imagine. And you've been in recruitment for then how many years essentially?
So it's going to be going on 10 years of just true recruitment experience.
10 years. Wow. Okay. So in those 10 years, I feel like you've obviously seen a lot in this space. And I guess kind of aligning with the topic of today about how has the remote working landscape changed? I mean, I guess the first question I'd like to ask is like, how did that change for you being in recruitment? I feel like you obviously have a lot of experience dealing with companies that are, hiring from all sorts and being able to understand what are these companies looking for is something that I'm sure the viewers want to hear about. But why don't we start by first giving a bit of a run through of how did your life change as far as the transition post pandemic into kind of more of a remote working culture?
I feel like since I got started in the space, I mean, we've really had just so much change in the technology that we utilize, right? So there was already a big shift happening even prior to the pandemic. Obviously, since the pandemic, I mean, listen, we live in a different world, right? But when I got my first job in recruiting, we were still interviewing candidates in person, right? So in order for me to be able to submit Samir to a role, we would have to meet in person. I was actually going to make you drive to an office, put on a suit, print your resume, and you're going to have to meet with me first, well before we ever present you to any of our clients, right? So as
Right,
you can
right.
imagine, that was obviously a huge just investment in time, for you. It was also a huge investment in time for us. There was different real estate requirements, so a lot of these firms were having to buy out or rent out fancy office space so we can look
Yeah.
impressive because every single candidate that we worked with was going to walk through our door at some point, right? And that was starting to shift. Like I remember, kind of in the early days of, what was Skype, I believe at the time,
Yeah,
having
yeah.
conversations via video. I remember, FaceTiming with candidates, pretty early on. And that felt like just an insane advancement in technology. And then obviously once we got into COVID, I mean, things were already starting to shift towards being able to meet people and people
Right.
being more comfortable just being able to have these conversations via video, right? And people were more comfortable with having the right tools on their laptops. They can take these calls from their cell phones. So we were already starting to see that. And then obviously when COVID came about and
It
everything went
just
remote,
fueled it.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think
So,
folks started getting more comfortable with it, right? Like there was also a generational gap.
yeah.
Obviously, people that were a little bit younger, that were more adept with technology were, just easier to get onboarded with that. But since COVID, I mean, everybody at this point is comfortable with video platforms. Everybody
Yeah,
knows how to utilize Zoom and Teams. So it's just made it a little bit easier. And it's honestly
for
saved,
sure.
uh, our industry a lot of time ultimately, and honestly a little bit of cash too. So.
No, no, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I think like when you look back at it, right, like if you think about how the technology landscape in itself has evolved over time, I mean, we always had a lot of these tools. I think always. I mean, if we look at the last kind of 10 to 20 years, like we were very much accustomed to using things like FaceTime, like Skype. This is how, families would communicate, or if you had to do business, that was international, for example, I would say that video calls and conferences was always a thing. I think to your point, the pandemic obviously fueled this transition where companies had to really adapt, and they had to kind of follow suit. So, how did you find, like, I guess from your perspective, that's understood, but from a candidate's perspective, were they quite easy to evolve to that? I appreciate the younger candidates who are in a generation where that's probably more what they've seen, slightly different. But like, when we think about executive search, we're thinking about, you're speaking to kind of potential CEOs or CFOs of corporations now coming into a very different environment. Like, how would you find that they adapted? Is this something you did to help them with that transition.
No, I mean, to be honest with you, I feel like most candidates adapted fairly easily, right? And especially if you're talking about the executive level, I mean, these guys are on the road so much as it is, right? They're already having to do a lot of this stuff. I think the big
Yeah.
difference is they weren't exclusively operating via video platform, right? But they were at least comfortable enough where they were already doing some of that. So when we started asking them, like, hey, instead of meeting us at our fancy office, drive down, put on your suit, and saying, hey, you don't have to do all of that anymore, right? Like you and I can.
You can wear your boxes and stay at home, and that's
Right,
fine.
exactly. You
Right,
can do
right.
whatever you want on the bottom as long as I can see the fancy shirt up
Yeah,
top.
yeah, yeah.
It was a lot easier for them. I think that where the bigger adjustment happened was with our clients, to be honest with you. I think that they had the comfort of, hey, you've met this person in person, right? Getting them to feel like, okay, like even if we haven't necessarily met this person in person, having these conversations via video, getting to feel how they still present themselves,
Yeah.
and feeling the comfort that, okay, like we've properly vetted these folks without necessarily having to be in the same location at the same time. I think was probably the bigger adjustment. But I think today everyone understands that it's just the way that business is done. Most organizations now, even if they're very anti-remote, I can tell you that almost all of them, the first screen of a
First
candidate is
screen, yeah.
usually going to happen over video now anyway. So they've kind of gotten used to doing that themselves.
No, no, absolutely. I find it's an interesting one because when you think about like that transition, your first screening is typically done remote. And then I think you may even be speaking to quite a few different I guess leadership the execs, better put, before you even get to that face-to-face interview. I think back in the day, I remember especially within the finance space, like there was group interviews you had to do. And I don't know if you ever saw that transition into like a remote kind of environment. Like was it always kind of one-on-one hiring, or did you ever have to like also like kind of manage if you had a few candidates you were sending to for one of the financial institutions that had to do a group presentation, for example? Did that ever come into play, or
Oh,
was it?
that very much still comes into play. So no, I mean, listen, I think that companies still handle the process in a very similar fashion, right? Instead of having you present to a team of individuals in person, they're having you
Yeah,
present via Zoom to a team of individuals, right? So
right,
the
right.
process is still the same. It's the technology and the platform that's different. But yeah, I mean
Exactly.
the presentations are still being done. We're still having panel interviews. It's just being done via Zoom and via Teams instead of in person.
Right, right. But what about like the actual, let's say the we're not referring to the Canada now. Let's look at more of the clients themselves, like because now you've seen this transition of what companies are really looking for. Now, we've fast forward 5 years post, the COVID era essentially, and now you're getting a lot of companies that are asking people to come back into the office. Like I think Jamie Dimon the other day was very passionate about his viewpoint, and I'm not here to compete against what he says. I have my views on where I see there's value in remote work, but I also understand this sentiment around like bonding, team bonding more than anything, and being able to kind of like, get better work done when you are together in an environment. And I think there is definitely something to be said about that, which we can come on to. But how do you find that the clients are adjusting to this? Because I'm assuming because of the situation we were all in a few years back, we got very accustomed to this idea of working from home, like that extra hour or two that you may not have got. And everyone is different. Maybe some people took an extra hour or two in bed. Maybe some people took an extra hour or two for themselves, personal development, whether it was reading, exercise. People found they could do a lot more when they were kind of having that flexibility to work from home. So before we even go into that, what is your view as far as companies who want people to come back? Has that been a struggle when it comes to kind of placing top talent because of the customization of one has had with their lifestyle during the pandemic?
So obviously there's a lot of nuance to this, right? I think that there are circumstances where I tend to side with the organizations that are asking their employees to come back to the office because there are certain functions where there is a lot of value in brainstorming and being able to share a room together and bounce ideas off of each other. There are absolutely certain disciplines that can be very beneficial for, right?
Yeah.
There are others that it doesn't matter at all, right? Like you give me an engineer and you sit him down with his laptop, it doesn't matter where he is. Like he's going to do the same quality of work in most cases. So there is a ton of nuance in terms of the types of roles. Now, in terms of organizations being comfortable with it, I mean, listen, we work with global organizations, right? And in most of these global organizations, the teams are dispersed. You're already having team members in one part of the world and team members in other parts of the world. So they're
Right.
already accustomed to doing this. So that's why I don't necessarily understand why people are, making such a big deal about, oh my God, Amazon's asking people to go back to the office. I can tell you
Yeah,
right now that there's still going to be a ton of remote Amazon workers, right? It's specific functions that they're asking to come
absolutely.
back
Yeah.
to the office. And listen, it's a case by case basis, right? I think in some cases it makes sense, in others it doesn't. You will lose talent because of it. Like you have to be willing to be okay with that because at the end of the day, if again, I'm Amazon, right? We're based in Seattle. I hired you remotely during COVID. You live in Chicago, and now I'm saying, hey, you need to come back to the office. You need to relocate
Overnight.
and move.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen. So you need to be okay with the fact that okay, we might lose a couple of employees along the way, but we feel that certain functions need to be back in the office. So every business has to kind of analyze the pros and cons of doing that and be
Yeah.
okay with it. Now, I think that just the mentality of everybody has to sit in an office, I think that that's a little flawed, right? I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that
No, no, I agree. I
you want
agree.
to put your people in position to be as successful as possible. And
Yeah.
it's not the same for everybody. There are some people that are going to be way more successful working from home. There are going to be others that are going to be way more successful working from an office. So again, you need to assess your team, you need to
Yeah.
assess your company and figure out, okay, what's best for us. But I think there is a generational divide there too, right? I think that
I
as
think assessing the team is a very good one. I actually remembered like when the first thing happened, I think not necessarily the companies that I was working with, but there was definitely the sentiment I had from like kind of my social peers or like when they were talking about how, how is those companies how are they treating you in your first few weeks of the pandemic? And I think companies did take a bit of a shock to the system being like, wait, people are now at home. We can't watch them, we can't monitor them. And for me, I've always had the same standpoint I have today than I had then. If you're telling me you don't want people to work from home because you don't trust that they're doing the work, my argument has always been the same. Why have you hired them in the first place?
so I agree with that to a certain extent, right? Again, there are certain points where it does make sense and you really do need to monitor people. And I think about my early accounting days, right? We would hire people straight out of college, straight out of university, right?
Yeah,
And these were, 23-year-old, first year staff accountants. Some of them had been interns, but if you were to tell me, hey, we're going to let all these folks work from home, my bigger concern is not necessarily whether they're doing the work that they need to do. Like,
but
listen,
how are they doing it? Or
responsible people are going to be responsible no matter what. But in those cases, they didn't even know what questions to ask, let alone to take the
right,
time to type out a question. So sometimes you need to go through the process of like, hey, this is how we do things. They need to kind of see it and feel
yeah,
it. And
yeah,
then from there, they can generate better questions. Now, if they're sitting in a room by themselves and they're not getting any exposure to how
yeah,
how the process is moving forward, it makes it very hard for them to even ask good questions.
yeah.
So I think at the early stages of the career, I think it's going to be very, very difficult for people to really like learn and progress.
Sure, sure.
But I mean, if
Especially
we're
the
talking
relationships haven't been made yet. They
right, but
haven't
if we're
been
talking
able to
about
interact.
experienced people who've done it for a while that know what they're doing, then I agree with you entirely, right? If I can't trust you to work from home, then I can't trust you to work from an office either.
No, that's very true. Very true. I mean, from a more of a personal standpoint, like, how have you found that, like, the transition you went through, like, as a personal standpoint, like, did you prefer working remotely? Do you prefer, like, having a more of a hybrid approach? Like, what is it that makes you tick?
So I was remote even prior to COVID, right? So I've done this
Okay.
now for going on what, 7.5 years.
Okay.
Now, it's important to note, and kind of our setup is we do operate primarily remotely. All of my offices, my headquarters have been in South Florida, right? So there's always been some in-office interaction. We still have office days, and that's been the case for my last couple of jobs. I find that for me at least, I tend to be more efficient working on my own, right? But again, I know what I'm doing. I've got enough experience where it makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, if I were to go back to my early career, I'd say probably not, but I like the flexibility to be productive when I am mentally most productive, right? Like you and I have
Right.
talked about this. I get up very early in the morning. I find that my brain is just more active early in the morning, and I don't want to have to get ready and jump in a car and make the drive to the office where
Right.
literally my freshest ideas come to me at 5 a.m., right?
Yeah.
So I can
So
optimize
just,
my
to-
workday around
I was
that.
gonna say, just to be very clear, we're not even talking about the 5 a.m. club here. We're talking about the 4 a.m. club here.
Yeah, yeah, but
Right.
I find that that works for me, right? And I think that working remote gives people the flexibility to be able to do the work that
Yeah.
matters most at the time that they're most productive, right? And then to
Yes.
be able to still, like, I still work the 8, 10 hours, whatever it may be. It's just
Right.
I
Right.
now get to choose when those best 8, 10 hours
Yes.
end up being.
And I think if a company can understand that aspect of things, like if you put, and we're seeing this right now, especially with a lot of the tech industry, like right now, is like companies that are thriving, in my view, are really giving that empowerment to their employees, right? They essentially are saying, like, look, we'll give you unlimited PTO. And I know some people that are listening right now are probably going to be like, oh, unlimited PTO it's a fad, it's this. In my view, unlimited PTO is never designed for someone to literally take unlimited PTO. That's not what it's there for. It's there to make sure that, listen, we trust you. You do what you need to do, however you want to do it. And as long as the results get produced, we're okay with that. And I think if you're someone who likes that type of structure, like every day you want to plan it slightly differently, you may have a doctor's appointment, you may have friends in town or families to see, you'll work around it. And I would even argue that when a company's giving you that much responsibility, you're going to deliver tenfold. You're going to deliver that much more. And it comes back to, again, like understanding the person you're dealing with. I think it sounds like to me that you've got a pretty great routine set out. If I was to compare that to, granted, you've been doing this for 7.5 years, but if you looked at the traditional kind of, waking up early, going into the office, what is that giving you as like your day-to-day goes, right? Like how do you really stay that productive if you're sitting in front of a screen or throughout the whole day? Like I think there's definitely have to be a balance around it. Um, and I just think we're being able to work when you feel is the best. Like I would say, like similar to you, morning time for me, I'm very active. My mind is alert. I like to do my reading. I like to do my workouts, and then I spend time doing my admin because that's when I have no distraction. And I will do pretty much. I'll do a 4 to 5 hour work day already, and it hasn't even hit like 11 o'clock in the morning. And I've done most of it. We've had our team meeting call as well. So now I feel productive. I'm ready to now tackle the day. By the time I hit my lunch, and I'm not going to go into the whole intermittent fasting session right now, but like by the time I hit that first meal, I'm probably not that productive straight afterwards. That's when I need to have some time to either like, make some calls, go for a walk, think about something a bit different, and then I'm ready to like, attack it again. And if you think about going into the office, I mean, for me personally, I never really had that. So I don't know how you find it when you're interviewing with candidates, like when you have to kind of convert them potentially to understand more of a hybrid approach or not. Like, have you had any pushback from that, or do you try to encourage the companies you're hiring for that you need to be, aware that this is how you attract better talent?
I mean, listen, with the companies we work with, it's a conversation we have regularly, right? There are very few candidates that are going to come to me. And again, it depends on, where they are in their careers, right? But most candidates today, one of the first things they ask me about is flexibility, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody wants to be remote. Some folks do prepare or prefer the hybrid approach, right? Where they want to be able to have an office and go a couple of days a week, but they also want the flexibility to be able to work from anywhere a couple of days
Yeah,
a week because that's what's most productive for them. And it's a big part of the conversation. So again, for some companies, it's kind of ingrained into their DNA. They're very
yeah,
good about it. And for the companies that it's not, like that's okay too. But you also need to understand that hey, you are going to miss out on some talent because of it, right? It's something
yeah,
that people at this point have not only become accustomed to, it's become a hard requirement for some. And it's funny because in my early days, the conversations were always centered around, hey, what does the job pay? What does the growth look like? Whereas
yeah, yeah, yeah,
always the first question is there any flexibility around a traditional workday? Is there hybrid flexibility? Is there
yeah.
remote flexibility? So that's a big part of it. So
No, for sure. I mean, what would you say like as far as like kind of the biggest pros and cons that you see with remote working?
so I mean, obviously there are a couple of major pros, right? And we'll approach it kind of from the company standpoint, right?
Yeah,
The big pro obviously is going to be access to talent. If you tell me, hey, we can open this job up remotely and we can hire this person anywhere,
yeah,
candidate pool for every job now
much
explodes,
larger.
right? Like now I'm not just looking at folks that are just within my geography or people that are willing to relocate. You're opening it up to absolutely everyone. I can tell
Yeah,
you that it's your offer in most cases is going to be more competitive because it does offer that flexibility, right? So if two
yeah,
candidates are assessing, the same offer essentially from a cash standpoint, right? Like both pay the same, but one is going to give me all the flexibility I want. One is going to expect me to drive to the office and sit there for 8 hours every
which
single
which one are
day.
you gonna go for?
Which one are you going to go for? It's always going to be the first option, right? So it's going to make you more appealing in the market.
Yeah,
Uh, so that's the big pro. Obviously, the con is, listen, with that being said, like you can make a bad hire remotely, you can make a bad hire that, with someone that's geographically close to you as well, right? I
Yeah.
think that the assessment process does become a little bit more difficult. It is a little bit harder to monitor employees in the very beginning in the sense of how do you assess their performance uh, without being able to kind of see the work every single day. So you need to create processes around that. And I think
Yeah.
that
No,
good companies
absolutely.
the good companies have figured that out, right? But there are some companies that are still struggling to do that, and they're hiring people remotely, and
Yeah.
they don't know how to assess their work. So, you can lose
No, no,
out
for
on
sure. For sure.
productivity.
And I think to your point, I think companies they owe that duty as well, right? Like I mean, for us, we have a daily catch up every day. Whereas the previous business that was 100% remote that I was in, we spoke once a week. That was like the formal call to have. And I was like, I understand why that was the case because I guess it was very much of an action driven call. It was like, let's see the productivity that's been done. But when you're new to an environment that you still have an onboarding process, you want to have that interaction having a daily touch point, I think is so vital just to see like where are we at? Like maybe things haven't changed too much in the last 24 hours, but you feel that you're part of something. And I think that's something which like was really missed during COVID where people did struggle. They didn't feel they were part of that community, right? Like why do people like going to the office? I think a lot of the if you ask a lot of people this question, it's the social aspect, right? I think people miss that during the pandemic. So having a processes in place, absolutely. I would even go as far as saying guardrails, because for me, I found that from a client perspective, one of the biggest pros was that, okay, well, if my employee is not going to be, coming into the office, that's an extra hour that they have, which they could be putting in the work, which I would say majority of the people, at least that I've come across in my time, really did. I felt like they were when they were waking up at like 5:30, 6:30, 7, etc. Their
Logging in.
first they were logging on straight away because I guess for whatever reason, right? Like I mean, whether it was like they felt they had to show their employer that hey, I'm here. I'm putting in work. I'm going to send an email this early so you know that I'm very much on my screen. I want you to trust me, type of thing. Or was it the fact that actually the expectations changed? Like you're now getting retaining that hour back. I think a lot of companies to start with were expecting a much larger output, but I think as we've now seen things transition, I think it's more about like setting up the right processes to your point, having right guardrails so you actually give people that work-life balance. I think in today's society, right, we're so attached to our phones. Um, I mean, I don't know if you have any good like best practice around that. I mean, you've obviously been with this firm for five about 5 years now, I think, coming up to 5 years,
Coming on 6.
coming
Yeah,
into 6 years. And
6.
I mean, from my experience, I can tell you that like I've honestly I truly have admired the work-life balance within this company. It's very much like we're going to trust you to do what you need to do, but yet you have full open access to everyone. I mean, you and I have spoken pretty early hours in the morning. I've also spoken with the founder very late hours in the evening because I feel like we're all here for like the purpose. So maybe that's a conversation to be had of like people you're hiring remote. Do they understand the purpose and the why of why they're really at your company?
Yeah. So, and I want to go back and touch on something that you mentioned earlier. So, I was with the company as we went through COVID and transitioning. We were already hybrid leading up to it, but truly kind of transitioning into this more remote model. So we were very thoughtful about having our daily debrief calls, right? And it
Yeah.
wasn't just to get an update on, hey, what are you doing? And hey, what are you doing? It was more because we wanted to make sure that there was still a connection between each other and between the company. So I want to
Sure.
ask you, Samir, in your last organization where you said you guys were having just a once a week kind of debrief call and it was mostly action oriented. I am curious, did you feel like you were missing out on collaboration? Did you feel like you were missing out on, people make friendships at work? Is that something that you feel was lost in that process?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because it was actually the first time I've ever like. So it was the two companies prior when I was in the UK was when I was it during the COVID period when I transitioned into remote working, and that I think that took some time to get my head around, but like I thoroughly enjoyed it. But to the stage now, I can openly say that I don't feel that my nature is someone who would like want to be in an office 5 days a week. I definitely see the value in meeting with people because I'm a very sociable, extroverted person. My whole role right now, I meet companies on a daily basis. I speak to different businesses on a daily basis. So it's very important to have that interpersonal touch. This last business, I would say, fantastic business, was very much 100% remote. And to your question, yeah, I definitely felt like to create the friendships I had, you had to spend more than that once a week to like, yeah, so you had to work on it. You had to make an active effort, So I would always put like, one-on-one calls, whether it was a virtual coffee, whether it was a chit chat, but I think we had to create that environment. But it was the first time I experienced it. So yeah, for sure. I think there needed to be a balance, which is what I'm happy with now. Like I think we have a daily touch point with M Search, which is great. We meet as a business at least once a month. Obviously, we meet like maybe sometimes 3, 4 times a month with some events that we all get together with. We have socials and stuff. And I think to me, that's very important. Like in an organization that is remote, I think there is a lot of value in remote, but you need to be in a position to understand that you need to create that camaraderie. You need to create that feel of belonging. And if you're 100% remote, I find it is very challenging. When we meet once a month, I think some of our best ideas get executed because we're brainstorming, we're figuring out how to tackle several different issues at once, and I think that's the best way of doing it. Sometimes it's difficult, when you're doing it remote. You could have bad internet connection or something else happens. That to me, by the way, alarms me more than anything. Like especially the companies that are very much within the tech space, you just set the wrong precedent. Like, I don't know. I could rant on about this, but I think in today's day and age, if you're having a call with someone and their internet's being choppy and this and that, I mean, I think that's where we need to get better.
Yeah,
No
I mean,
question.
listen, it affects things. I think there's also a level of people just understanding that there are things out of your control, right? Like at the end of the day, you are at the mercy of your
Yeah,
internet service provider from those things.
sure.
But that's why I think it's also important to listen, you still have to have the face to face, right? So
Yeah,
again, kind of going back to best practices, again, we were very thoughtful about the fact that we still wanted to hire folks that were geographically close enough where we're going to be able to
yeah,
still meet face to face from time to time and more than just, okay, like our, once a month kind of team on site. But you need to make the effort, right? And
yeah,
then in some cases you do have to go above and beyond, but that would be my best practice is figure out a way to still facilitate some face-to-face meetings because you do connect in a different way in person. And then for us, it's, those daily meetings are so valuable because it does give us a little bit more time to be able to talk about personal things and get to know each other a little bit better and not just, hey, it's a 1 hour per week meeting where it's all action, action, action. There's no
yeah,
time for that collaboration. Whereas with these kind of daily meetings, you get a little bit more of that. But I think
absolutely. Yeah,
that could become an issue with time, especially if you have these, kids that just graduated college and have only known kind of post-COVID life. I don't think they realize that they need to make extra effort to be able to develop those
yeah,
relationships. Like that's my concern. Is I think you and I kind of grew up before that, so we understand like you kind of need to go above and beyond to be able to
yeah.
really create those bonds. One of my concerns is I don't know if that's going to be happening after this kind of next generation comes into leadership.
So
So
how does a company navigate around that? So we've discussed like the fact that they have to have a good process in place. They need to set good guardrails, for example, right? And respect people's time as well, like late evenings, early mornings, things like that. But to your point, and I completely agree with that, right? Like I mean, it's a shame that the new, I mean, what do we call them? Gen Zs, or are they going to be another name? I don't even know, but
there's another one coming after them, I'm sure. So.
right. But like they will miss out that typical Monday morning coffee, you're around surrounding the coffee machine talking about what you did in the weekend. Did you guys watch the game? Things like that. Like how does one now look to incorporate that? So we mentioned a bit about like the interaction part, right? Do you think the companies that we're speaking to now, are they doing enough on that engagement piece to like really get to know who the candidate is?
We'll find out with time, right? I think that there are some companies that are starting to take more active steps towards getting to that point, but I don't think it's all of them. And I think a lot of them, their answer to that is we're bringing everybody back to the office, right? Like that's kind of what the
Yeah.
response has been, or it's like, okay, we're going to allow some people to take a day or two from home, but at the end of the day, you're back in the office for
Yeah.
maybe
I
five
think
days a week. So I don't know. Like
yeah.
we'll have to see how that plays out over time.
That's I think for at least my interaction with the companies I'm speaking with right now, there's definitely a hybrid model. I think if you are a very kind of the new tech business in today's industry is very much 100% remote. Um, we know they'll do an onboarding. They'll give you a pretty decent size setup fee to make sure you have like the brand new spanking laptop, you got the right internet connection, you got everything set up. They'll typically give anywhere between $500 to $1,000 to make sure you're fully set up. they've now partnered with these companies like ClassPass or WellHub and things like that, which provide you access to like, a plethora of different activities. I think that like that's what a lot of these companies are now doing. And I think I look at them as like the future of where I see a lot of the modernized companies where they're going and transitioning. Well, when you compare that to obviously the traditional houses, I mean, Jamie Dimon, we mentioned him earlier on. Like, he made it very clear that he thinks people need to all be going back into the office. He was obviously more passionate of how he articulated that message than I'm saying right now. And I don't know. I look at this as like going back to what you said. Like it depends on the role you're in, what stage of the career you're in. I think there's a balance, but I guess for companies that are doing that, yeah, you owe a duty to the candidate to make sure that they are onboarded correctly. And doing that remotely can be a challenge. There's no question around that. So being able to understand that and creating that culture, I think is going to be very important. Um, we're now also talking about the idea of I don't know if you've heard much from businesses yet, but like a 4-day work week. It's obviously not mandated by any means yet, but like any thoughts on that?
So I have seen some of the studies about it. I think we need a bigger sample size. it's a it's a slippery slope, right? And I think that over time we would have to see the results in the long term to really see if there is positive productivity that comes from it. I mean, the simple answer is I don't know, right? All of the studies say that it is beneficial, but I think there's also you know, just momentum that comes with the
Yeah,
excitement from the team that hey, we're only doing this, and if it goes well, we're going to get this 4 day per week thing. So they're going to work a little bit harder, just the intrinsic motivation of that, right?
right. Is
If you
that what
were
the study showed essentially? Like you do a 4-day work week, but your output is that much more significant, for example?
yeah, so the studies I've seen show that there are like pretty significant increases in productivity, even though you're technically working the same amount of hours, right? But because it's only being done in 4 days, because people have the incentive to have that, that third weekend day off. But I think a lot of that is just intrinsic motivation because they know that if this is a pilot program, if it goes well, you might be able to keep this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I wonder what it would be like if all of a sudden we just flip the switch and everybody has only worked 4 days per week. Would we actually be more productive? Like, I don't know. I think the sample size is too small. Like, listen, for me, I'm a big believer in adapt or die, right? If other
Yeah.
organizations are doing it and candidates deem it valuable and they're willing to take, they want those opportunities over mine, I say try it and see how it works, but along the way you really have to assess, if things are actually improving or if they're not. But listen, I'm a big believer in giving people flexibility and allowing them to do what they deem best, right? And figuring out, okay, if this is the best way for you to get the job done, then do it, right? I don't care if you're sitting at a desk for, this hour or that hour. To
Yeah, yeah,
me,
yeah.
do the job the best way that it can be done, figure out a way to do it, right? And,
And
and I
you
think
you
that the good
measure, yeah,
companies do that.
absolutely. Measure the productivity is everything, right? As opposed of just kind of, well, they have that the other side of the coin here is just like am I saying this right? Out of sight, out of mind is what a lot of people say. But like, I would argue that your productivity could be like the biggest visual that one could see, right? Like if someone is productive, to your point, whether it's being in an office or, being work at a coffee shop or being at home, people want to see results. I think that's what it really comes down to. Like, are you a company that's an action driven, like, you're measuring your like the performance of people. And if you're doing that correctly, I think it comes down to like the question you should be asking yourself as a company is how do I get that output? You know, like who am I dealing with? Am I incentivizing my team enough? Am I giving them the right flexibility or the autonomy to do that output? And if the answer is yes, I think remote working has tremendous value, you know?
Yeah. But again, companies need to figure out the best way to facilitate that, right? But the good companies will do it and the bad ones will go away. It's just the way that the world works, right?
Yeah. No, no, for sure. Sure. Well, look, I think that's brought us about the kind of the end of our call. But like Fernando, thank you for your time. Very insightful. Any last message you want to say to companies out there?
No, listen, this was great. Like I said, I think that for if I were to give any advice, it's be flexible, right? Like adapt with time, adapt with technology, and you'll be in the best position to be successful going forward. So
Love it. Love it. Cool.
cool.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Samir. All right, talk soon.
See you, man.
You've just listened to another episode of MSearch's Leadership Delivered. To learn more and connect with us, click below or head to our website at msearchadvisory.com.